The last video that we did in this malt series, we went over the basics
of base malts.
Today we're gonna see what happens when you take those same malts and we add a kilning step at around 180 to 220 degrees. We're gonna see what happens if you brown them a little bit.
Or orange them?
Or straw yellow them.
Or even amber them?
Which means we're talking today about toasted malts.
Toasted malts have one of the widest variety of malts available on the market. These things are everywhere and you probably don't even realize it.
Toasted malts can range anywhere from the 4 to 6 level bond all the way up to 150, maybe even darker than that.
But first off, let's differentiate them from caramel malts because a lot of times that can be confusing. What that does is it comes down to the process.
The process of making toasted malts is taking a base malt and browning it just a little bit, not to the point where you're really denaturing a lot of the enzymes, so it still has diastatic power. But in caramel malts, the moisture content's high and it actually crystallizes the sugars in there and degrades the enzymes very rapidly. So some toasted malts on the light end can have a great deal of diastatic power and caramel malts don't.
So on the light end, toasted malts will actually maintain their diastatic power. Malts like Vienna malt and malts like Munich malts will actually still have plenty of diastatic power to convert themselves. With that said, unlike a lot of your base malts, they don't quite have enough power to convert a lot of other high adjuncts.
And this diastatic power really starts to die down at that 15 to 20 level bond range. It still has enough to convert some of itself, if not all of itself, but you definitely don't want to rely on it to convert any other malts in your grain bill. The trade-off there is that when you get to that darkness, you get a lot more flavor.
So let's give you a breakdown on some of these lighter malts that you may or may not be familiar with.
Obviously on the light end you have things like the Vienna malts, and then from there you kind of go into Munich malts, and there are degrees of Munich malt. There's light Munich malt, medium Munich malt, and I've seen them range anywhere from also 6 level bond to I think as dark as 30, maybe even darker than that in Munich malts.
Also there's going to be things like aromatic malts, melanoidin malts,
Victory malts.
Damn it, you took it out of my mouth.
And going darker to that, speaking of Victory malt, Briefs also makes a specialty malt which is called Special Roast, which kind of falls into this category. And then in that crossover rum, they have one at 130 level bond called Special,
X?
Super Special.
Super Special?
The Special Roast, the 121?
Wait, it's only like 50 or 60.
An extra special malt, like we didn't just spend a lot of time discussing.
As for flavor profiles, things like your Victory malts, your aromatic malts, and your darker Munichs, a lot of time are going to give you a more intense nutty flavor than a base malt like Maris Otter will. But also they can give you a lot of complex of that sort of like light actual toast character, hence be the name.
In these flavors you can get things like you mentioned nutty, that browning of a toast. You can get mild sweetness but not direct sweetness. Basically you can get a complex series of characters, and on the darker end that can even turn into almost like a less sweet version of dark fruits, like dehydrated fruits.
Oh, tangy. Nutty, tangy, biscuity.
Nutty, tangy, biscuity. And one of my favorite flavors that you can get off the middle of this is what I like to call, if you were to brown a marshmallow and peel the skin off and just eat the skin. That comes from toasted malts. So we already mentioned that things like Vienna and Munich malt you can use as base malts, meaning you can use them 100% of your grist, and they can still convert some other sugars too. Even though the darker ones in that 15 to 20 SRM level bond kind of range still have diastatic power, their flavors get a lot stronger, meaning you don't want to use them as pungently. What would you say for usage on that 15 to 20 level bond range?
Generally anywhere from about 5 all the way up to 25% on those. It's obviously going to depend on the beer and the style that you're brewing.
When I'm building recipes, what I like to think of when I'm in the toasted malt world is I think of them as kind of the middle. They're a good bridge between dimensional flavors like your base malts all the way down to your sweet malts like crystals or your dark malts like roasted malts. These toasted malts really add character.
These can usually be used in lighter colored beers, even IPAs to a very small amount. Usually, I don't like to throw any more than about 5% of these in an IPA, but in other styles that are going to be more malt forward, a lot of English styles for instance, you can go up to 20 or even 25% of these in a grain bill.
And of course this scales, so the darker and more pungent the grain, the less of it you use, no matter what the style is. And the lighter and less pungent the grain, the more of it you can use. For example, Vienna Malt, if you want to get a little extra character in your IPAs, you could probably use 2 pounds for a 5-gallon batch and not have it really distract from the overall flavor of the IPA.
On those darker styles, English styles, things like porters, things like stouts, brown ales that are really, really malt dominated, those are where we're actually going to be using pretty high quantities of these toasted malts, and oftentimes darker toasted malts, the things like your brown malt, your amber malts.
And not to mention historical styles that you'll be using the lighter end of these spectrums, the Munich and the Vienna, 100% as your grain bill. So that'll be your Martins, your Oktoberfests.
A lot of dark German lagers, yeah.
Or even for a classic fest beer, if you find a Vienna malt that's in that 3 or 4 level bond range, that works perfect as your base malt.
Or Link Munich, wherever that is, somewhere around us.
Yeah, that one comes in at like 6. That's a fantastic base malt too.
Beautiful Märzen.
Heck yeah. So like with most categories of malts, there's a world of possibilities out here. Let's narrow it down a little bit to things that we personally use a lot. One thing that we find ourselves using in a great deal of our recipes, even on the lighter side, is aromatic malts. Aromatic malt adds a nice dimension of character without being overly assertive in one direction. And I choose aromatic over Victory because Victory oftentimes adds a dried toast kind of character that I think gets aggressive really fast, whereas aromatic kind of softens and falls back into the grain while still adding that nice dimension of character.
We'll try to post a link to the Franco Belges Aromatic, which is our favorite brand to use here. On that note, another one of at least my personal favorites is Briche's Special Roast. This is a great malt for any of your really dark variety beers to add a few layers of complexity without adding cloying sweetness, because odds are you're already going to have some caramel malts in there, so throwing more caramel malt at it isn't going to help. Now, this malt is the epitome of I just call it the roasty toasty tastiness, right? It's got this drying impact, but it's got this multi-layered toasted character to it, and just goes great in any kind of English porter or stout. Well, I'm out of beer.
And that pretty much covers everything I think we wanted to go over when it comes to toasted malts. If you've got any specific questions on a type of toasted malt, or you're wondering if a malt falls into this category, leave a comment in the comment section below and we'll try to get to that. Also, if you can think of any specific malts you'd like us to do a whole video on, kind of like we did with our acid malt video, if you want to check that out, also let us know in the comments below.
Viva la beer.
Viva la beer.
Nap time?
Nap time.
But yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe. Yeah.
And comment bells and bells.
Peter, what are you doing?
Huh? What time is it?
I don't know.
Let's go back to work. Oh, God. Oh. All right.